QuickBooks Online 2025. Enter purchase order, sometimes called a PO form. Get ready and some coffee because we're learning how to save time with QuickBooks Online 2025. Here we are in our QuickBooks Online Get Great Guitars 2025 project file we set up in a prior presentation, opening the major financial statement reports as we do every time. The reports are located on the left-hand side. Within the standard reports, we're in the favorites. We're going to be right-clicking on that balance sheet so we can open a link in a new tab. Right-click the profit and loss, otherwise known as the income statement, to open a link in a new tab. Let's tab to the right, close the hamburger. This time I'm just gonna run it for the month of January so that we have the cutoff at the end of January, which will hopefully make it easier to see if I have any date problems by entering a date after the point in time that our practice problem is being set, that being the month of January 2025, 010125 to 013125 tab, run it so it can refresh it, and then we'll tab to the right and repeat the process. Closing the hamburger, the month of January, 010125 tab, 013125 tab, run it to refresh it. Nothing's currently in the profit and loss for 2025 because we're still working on those transactions typical to setting up a new business, which we will recap quickly by going to the balance sheet, noting when you start a new business, you typically first need capital. That means basically cash, which you can either get from yourself or the owners putting money into the business, which we did with a deposit from the owner. And then we also had a transaction of a loan, getting money from the bank, putting it into the checking account. Once we had money in the checking account, we bought stuff, including furniture and equipment. So depending on the industry you're in, you might need like a store or something like that, might need a truck, you might need the equipment that you're going to be using, furniture, and so on and so forth. Also, if you have inventory, you're going to need to buy the inventory before you can make money selling the inventory, which is what we'll work on this time. Let's go to the tab to the left, select the plus button. Now remember that inventory kind of straddles our two cycles, that being the ultimate money coming in cycle, the customer cycle or revenue cycle, this column, and then the money going out cycle, the purchases cycle or expenses cycle or vendor cycle in this column, and then the payroll cycle is kind of like the purchases cycle because money's going out for services in the form of employees. But right now, money's going out ultimately, or money will be going out when we purchase the inventory, and then we'll sell the inventory, which will help us to generate money coming in. So when we're in a purchasing situation, usually we're using like an expense form, and the other side's going to be an expense for goods and services that we purchase. But this time, we're purchasing inventory, which is kind of a special type of purchase, and we may, in some cases, then need to use the purchase order. Now note that you would only use the purchase order if number one, you have inventory, and number two, you have a little bit more control, the ability to request inventory before you pay for it. To get a better idea of that, let's take a quick look at the flow chart over here. This is a QuickBooks desktop screenshot of the flow chart, noting that we are using QuickBooks Online. This is just to help us see the flow chart, which works in any kind of accounting system typically, right? So if we're buying inventory, we would be on the vendor side of things. You can see the purchase order on the top left, and then we're gonna receive basically the inventory. Now note that when we buy inventory or when we buy stuff as an individual online from a store such as Amazon, we typically have to pay for it. They charge our credit card before they ship it. That means we would record the transaction when we request the item. But sometimes we might have a little bit more control. If I'm ordering 1,000 teacups from China or something and I do business with them a lot, I might have the capacity then to request the inventory before we actually pay for it, have them actually ship it, then be able to receive the inventory, see if it matches what was requested, and then pay for it. So we have a little bit more control in that situation. So the purchase order is just simply a request form. It's going to be a request type of form that doesn't have a transaction related to it because we don't actually have the inventory yet. and we haven't paid for the inventory. However, we still want to track the request to see if it matches out to the inventory that we do receive. So you can kind of see of it as a purchase order. It's kind of like an order because we have a little bit more control in this situation. Possibly we're a larger type of business in that situation, and we're like the general. This isn't a request. We're ordering purchase. It's a purchase order. No, it's really kind of a request. But you could send out the purchase order. Then what's going to happen, we can imagine if they were the teacups, or in our case, the guitars, those guitars would be shipped over possibly with a bill within the box. We can then count the guitars that we have received to see if they match the request on the purchase order, at which point we enter the bill. And then that is when we record the actual transaction when we enter the bill. And then, of course, we would pay the bill. That's the general process. So that means that a lot of small businesses, even if you deal with inventory, you might not have the purchase order in your system, because basically when you buy the inventory, you're paying for it at the point in time you buy it, either at the actual location that you buy it at. If you go to like a Home Depot or something, you buy the stuff there and then make it or something like that. Or when you buy something and resell it, you might have to pay for it when you buy it, in which case you wouldn't have the purchase order situation. It's only when you're requesting. Okay, so if we go into the purchase order, we'll go in here and we'll say we're going to have a purchase order. Requesting items, we're going to say it's for Epiphone. It's going to be our vendor. That's the one vendor that we have set up already. That's who we purchase guitars from. Usually we would be giving the purchase order to the vendor. Therefore, we would need their email address, because that's typically how we basically are delivering the purchase order these days. And the status here is going to help us to determine whether we have received the purchase order. That's going to help us to sort the purchase orders to track whether or not the request has been fulfilled or not. It has opened or closed as the status. So mailing address, we don't have one for Epiphone because we're just requesting it from them, but they need the shipping address to give it to us. Notice that by default, it's going to give us our address, basically the store address that we have in our QuickBooks system. However, you can imagine a situation where we can deliver it directly to the customer. So for example, we might have a customer come to us and say, hey, look, I want this particular guitar. We're like, okay, we're going to go to our vendor and request that guitar for you. We might then fill out the purchase order, but instead of sending it to us and then us sending it to the customer, or the customer coming into the shop, we have Epiphone deliver it specifically or directly to the customer. So in that case, we might choose the customer, which would adjust or change the address that we're going to here. But we're going to keep it going to our store. We're going to put the date as 01/12/25 that we will have. And ship via, I'm going to leave that blank. And then the store, I'm going to leave that as is because we have the one primary location. We're going to keep that there. We're not going to add any tags. And then we have the category down below. Now, if it was a category, then I might assign it to an expense type of form. But typically, that would be assigning it to an account or possibly to inventory or something like that. But typically, what we're going to do is assign it to an item because we're purchasing inventory, and inventory needs to not only go to an account, but listing out the things that we're purchasing by item. Now, you'll recall that we already have the items set up for Epiphone. If I didn't, I could set up the items as we go, but we already have them in place. So let's imagine we're going to buy an ELP. So I'm just going to type in ELP. It's already been set up because we set up the items as though we're going to be tracking inventory on a perpetual inventory system. Tab. So that's going to be the ELP. And then I'll type in the description. It didn't put Epiphone Les Paul. And then the quantity is going to be 20. And the rate is going to be, hold on, that should populate by itself. Let's do this again. I'm going to go in here and just click it, and it should populate the rate. So let's do this again. So the description pulls in automatically. I have to add the quantity. I have one on hand right now. We're going to buy 20 of them at $400 each. That's the cost, not the sales price. That comes out to an amount of $8,000. Now, we could add a customer. Why is there a customer field here? Because it's possible that I'm buying the guitars specifically to turn around and sell them. That will help to remind me that I need to then charge it to a customer once I receive these items. But I'm not going to do that this time. We'll see that later. Let's say we're also going to get an ERP, an EPR. That's going to be an Epiphone Riviera. So the description populates. We're going to buy 5 of those. $440 is the cost, not the sales price. Amount $2,200. Okay. Then let's say we're also going to be buying an EPSH, picking that one up. We'll buy 4 of those, and that's going to be cost of $1,280. And then we're going to be buying an EPSP, which is an Epiphone Standard Pro. We're going to buy 5 of those. Okay, so there is what we're going to be purchasing. Now, if we just take a look at the rest of the form, if we needed to add more lines, we can add more lines. We can clear all the lines. We can add a message. We can add a memo if we need to. We can cancel it. We can clear it. We can print it, or we can make it reoccurring. If I print it, just to take a look at it here, we can take a look at it. And so when we send it in an email, in essence, it's going to look something like this. So, and this is a form that we could customize if we wanted to put like our logo on it and whatnot. I think we have another course or section on customizing forms if you want to do that. And then in the more button, we can copy, we can delete, we can look at the history, we can add an attachment if we need to, save it, save and close as the default. Save and new or save and send. Normally we would be doing a save and send, you would think, as we would be emailing it, but in our case we will simply save and close it. Now, there's not going to be any impact on the financial statements, even though that form looked like it's kind of like a purchase, like there's numbers involved. Shouldn't there be an impact on the financial statements? No, because although there are numbers involved, we didn't actually pay for it, and we haven't actually got any claim to the inventory yet. But we do want to track it. Where do we do that? We can do so in the sales tab on the left-hand side. We could go into the all sales, and I'm going to close up the hamburger, and this is going to sort all of the forms that are in basically the sales cycle, revenue cycle. I'm sorry, I should go on. Let's open this back up. We're on the purchasing side. Let's go into the expenses on this side, close up the hamburger, and then we could go into the expenses on the left-hand side. Under the transactions, I want to look for the purchase orders, and there is our purchase order. We can resend it over here. We can copy it to a bill, which is basically what we would expect to happen next, right? We're going to receive the guitars, hopefully, tie out the guitars that we received to the purchase order. The guitars, box of guitars will typically have a bill in it, a bill from the client that we can then enter into the system, but we could make it a little bit easier by copying the purchase order information to the bill, which, if everything goes smoothly, should populate properly, because that should hopefully be the amount of guitars that we actually received. So that's how we're gonna basically track the purchase orders. Now, we could also go into the vendors, imagining we got the box of guitars. We could say, okay, well, where do they come from? Well, we have the sorting up top by purchase orders, Epiphone. So here's the vendor that we're purchasing from going into Epiphone. Then we have the activity down below. This is the bill that we entered before because we owed Epiphone the $15,000. Here's the new purchase order, and that's the other way we can get into the purchase order. So closing that back out. Let's do another one. Otra vez, por favor. Do another one. Let's go to the ham boogie. Select the plus button. We're gonna go purchase order again. I want to order another purchase. This is an order, dang it. This time we're gonna add a new vendor on the fly as we go. Gibson USA is going to be who we purchased this from. Haven't purchased anything from them yet, therefore we'll add the vendor. Now, because this is the person we purchased from a lot, we might want more information than simply just their name, which is all we typically want from the vendor if it was something like the telephone company or something. But this is all we need by default oftentimes to enter the vendor, so we're going to keep it at that for now. We will save it. And then we would typically want the email address, but I'm going to leave that blank for now. Usually we would have the email address as how we send the purchase order, unless you want to still mail out the purchase order, mailing address, which would be necessary, again, if you were to mail it. And then the shipping to, we're going to ship it to us, not to a customer. So I'll leave that as is. The date, 1/12/25, we'll keep that the same. We don't need anything here. And then the items. All right. So let's go down here. And this time, we already have this in there as well. It's a GIUSA, I believe. So we already have that one. The reason we didn't have the vendor in the system is because we didn't owe anything to the vendor yet. Therefore, we hadn't put the vendor in into our system because we only put the ones that we had accounts payable to, even though we have them in there as an item that we might have done business with in the past in the prior accounting system. So we're going to buy then 3 of those. They cost $304. That's the sales or the cost, not the sales price. That comes out to $912. So then we've got $912 that we're going to be recording. All right, let's try to do another one. This time I'm going to do it at the same time. So I'm going to say save and new before we check those 2 out. So save and new. And this time I'm going to make another vendor up top. This one I'm going to say is Diamond Head. That's going to be the vendor tab. We're just going to add it. Looks good. That's all we need to add it. Tab, 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 tab. We'll keep the date the same. And this time we're going to buy some ukuleles. All right. So we're going to say how many we want. This is going to be the DUK, the Diamond Head Ukulele. I think there should be a D in there. Diamond Head. I don't know. Anyways, we're going to buy 3 of those at 24 is the cost. That's going to be $72. And then let's add another one. So I'm going to say save and new again. And this time we're going to buy from Epiphone again. So I'm going to say Epiphone, tab, tab. Now we already have that vendor set up. Boom. And tab, 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 tab. Notice that what it tries to do is populate based on the prior transactions because of the settings that we have, which is great sometimes, but we don't want it this time to do that because I'm going to be purchasing something different. That works great mainly with the category when I buy something like the telephone and then it remembers the account that I went to last time, like telephone expense. So here I'm just going to delete these and I'm going to re-input, put those in the can, man. All right, so then we're going to say this is going to be, we're going to buy an ELP. This is all like our go-to guitar. And we're going to buy another 50 of those. But this time, we're going to imagine that we bought them specifically for a particular customer, which is going to be, I'm just going to type in Eric Music. So now we're adding a customer on the fly as we go, in other words. I'll hit the plus. So we have a customer. I'm just going to keep it at the minimum default information. Although with the customers, if they're repeat customers, we might want their email address and their phone number, for example, and possibly their address if we're going to be shipping it to them. But I'm going to keep the minimal information here and say, okay, save it. Now note, now we have a customer on the purchase order. The purchase order is going to the vendor, the people that we buy the guitar from. Why do I have a customer field on the form used to help to request the purchase of the guitar? Is it for the vendor's information? In other words, does Epiphone care about the fact that I'm going to turn around and sell this to the customer, Eric Music? No, Epiphone doesn't care. But if I put it on the purchase order, that will remind me once I get the guitars to turn around and then make a sales document, an invoice or sales receipt selling these guitars to Eric Music. So we're acting as the middle person. We're buying the guitars from Epiphone, but we already have a customer in mind. Therefore, we're going to put it on the purchase forms to remind us that we can then sell this once we get them directly to the customer. All right, so then we're going to say, let's also put an EPSH. So here we have that. So notice what we can do here is have multiple different items that we purchase. In this case, of course, from the same vendor, we are requesting multiple guitars. And where this got disappeared, Eric Music. Where did it go? Eric Music. And then I'm going to add, and then I could add different customers. So it's possible, in other words, for me to be requesting guitars from one vendor, have multiple line items for different guitars, and assign those different guitars to different customers. But in our case, we're going to assign them to the same customer, Eric Music, for both of those line items. And that comes out to $23,200. So same kind of process, except now we've added the customer to turn around and sell them when we receive them. Let's do another one, save and new. All right, so this one's going to be one for Gibson this time. Gibson USA. Gibson USA. So we have that vendor in there. We'll keep the dates the same. We're just buying guitars like crazy, or we're requesting them at least. And then it's trying to populate down here, so I'm going to delete that so I can put in my own information. I don't want to repeat what we did before. Now this time, we're going to imagine that we want a guitar that we don't have an item set up for yet. So instead of going to the item list and adding the item and then coming back here to the purchase order, we'll set up the item on the fly as we go. We're going to give an abbreviation of a GSB, so we don't have that yet. So I'm going to add it on the fly, adding the inventory item just as we go. So I'm going to call it a GSB. It's going to be not a service item, but it's going to be an inventory item that we're going to be purchasing here. So item is inventory. Okay, now we could add an image. I'm not going to be adding an image. The SKU is going to be, let's actually adjust this. It's going to be, I'm going to call it a Gibson SG. And then I'm going to say that it's going to be then a GSB will be the SKU, the GSB. Gibson GSB. I don't know why exactly that's the name. I'll keep it there though. And that's because that's what I have in my notes here. So I'm going to copy this and we're going to bring down to here. So the quantity on hand, this is a required field, but it's always going to be 0 whenever we set up a new one, because if I put something other than 0, it's going to record a transaction as we go. And I don't want to record a transaction because I'm purchasing the inventory. I would only put an item here when I first set up the inventory items if I'm setting up the new company file. So as of date, again, it's a required field. So I'm just going to say, make sure it's a date, but like at the beginning of the month here. So I'll put that there. The reorder point, I'm going to bring it down to 0 for the reorder point. So it's going to remind us when we need to order more inventory. So I'm just going to keep it at 0. The inventory asset, the inventory asset account is going to be inventory asset, meaning that's going to be the account that goes up when we buy the inventory, not with the purchase order. That's the request for the inventory. But when we actually get the bill, we'll put it in inventory. Inventory will go up in this account, and then it will decrease when we sell the inventory, either with an invoice or sales receipt type of form. Sales description, I'm going to say, is the Gibson SG. Once again, we're going to sell it. We're going to imagine that we sell it for $598. So the income account that we're going to record when we sell it, which is not going to be on the purchase order or the bill, but then once we have the guitar, we turn around and sell it, we're going to use an invoice or sales receipt to sell it. And then it's going to record revenue at that time of the to the sale of product income on the income statement for the sales price. And then the purchase amount is going to have the purchase description again. That's going to be the amount that's going to be on the purchase forms, which is going to be the purchase order, and then the bill. And then I'm going to change this a bit. I'm going to say let's say we sell it for $777, and then we purchase them down here for $598, let's say. That's what I have in my notes here. So now we're going to say that the expense account is going to be cost of goods sold. When will that be impacted? Not when we buy the inventory. We're going to increase the inventory when we buy it by the $598. And then when we sell the inventory with an invoice or sales receipt, we'll sell it for $777, which is going to increase the sales. But we will also decrease the inventory asset account by the $598, the cost, and record the related expense for us selling the inventory at the same period that we sell it for. which is going to be at a cost of goods sold at the 598. So that's on the income statement. Preferred vendor, we could put the preferred vendor here, which would be Gibson, I guess. We could put that Gibson USA. Okay, there we go. And let's save it and close it. All right. So now let's say that we have the Gibson. Let's say that we're going to purchase 10 of those, and it's going to be for $598. So that's going to be 5980. We're going to imagine that we're purchasing these for a specific customer. Going to add the customer on the fly as we go. Music stuff. You would think it'd be hard to do stuff on the fly because flies are really small, and then when they're flying around, you're doing stuff while you're on the fly. But no, see how easy it is? Because QuickBooks makes it easy. So we're going to add the customer, music stuff store. And so I'm just going to add the needed information and keep it at that. So we will save and close that. So we have a request for 5980. All right, let's see what we've got then. What do we got? Let's go, wait a sec, save and close. Let's say save and close this time. That's the last one, hopefully. Selected date, select a date that's after the date you started tracking this inventory item, okay? All right, so I did the classic problem and a practice problem. I entered a date in the current date and it's messing me up now. So let's see if I can fix it. So I'm gonna right click on this up top, duplicate it. I'm gonna pull it to the right, and then I'm gonna go check out this item that I set up. I'm gonna close this up. I'm gonna go into the sales and close up the hamburger. I'm in the products and services. So here's the items that we have. And this is the new one that we just set up. So I want to edit that one and say, okay, what is wrong with the date issue on this one? And so if I edit this thing, we go into the quantity on hand, the starting value. I'm going to go into that starting value, and then I can see, oh, here's what I did. I put it in there 3. I got to put it in January. So let's go and change that. Let's bring it back to January. And then that should make it okay. So let's go ahead and save it. And now this one's on another tab. So let's save it again before I do that. Save it again. Let's go now to this tab and see if it lets me record it. See if it can refresh and let me record it without me having to do the data input again on it. Let's save it and close. And there, it won't let me do it because it needs, I think, to refresh. So let's refresh the screen and try to do the data input again. It's going to be then the Gibson USA tab, and we're going to buy Gibson USA. I want 10 of those for then, I think it was the music stuff store that we bought it for. But hold on, it wasn't it was a GSB that we bought. A GSB. So 10 of those gets me to the 5980. Okay, so there's the 5980. And let's try to save and close again. All right, it worked. All right, let's close this prior tab up. I don't need that anymore. And closing this, let's check out what we got. What do we got? So nothing happened to the financial statements. If I go into the sales tab, close up the ham boogie, then we can go into the all sales transactions and wait, not the sales tab. Let's open this back up and go into the expenses tab because we're buying the inventory. Close up the ham boogie. Let's start by going to the expenses tab, and we want to drop down, look for the purchase orders again. So now we have all of these open purchase orders. I could filter the purchase orders. So we have the status, all statuses. We're looking at just the open purchase orders. They're all open at this case, but let's look at the open purchase orders and let's bring the date back for like the last, this is from 2024. That's fine. That'll work. All payees and all category. Let's apply that. And so there's all of our purchase orders. All right. So we can also see those by going to our vendors. And then we can look for the vendors filtering by just clicking the purchase orders button. And here's our vendors that have those purchase orders within them. Let's click it again. So there they are. So we have Diamond Head. If I go into Diamond Head, we've got the one purchase order for the ukuleles here. If I go then back to the vendors, notice that the back button is internal. We typically don't have to use the back arrow button on the browser because most of QuickBooks has it kind of internal. So I'm going to go back this way. And then Epiphone, we've got the 2 purchase orders in there. So 2 purchase orders, boom, boom, back. And then we also have the Gibson, who's got the 2 purchase orders as well. So we expect to be receiving guitars and having the bills within the guitars. When we get those, then we can take these purchase orders and copy them over to a bill, which will actually record a transaction, which will have an impact on the financial statement. So note, the purchase order is the one form, or one of the forms, the main 2 forms that don't have an impact. Meaning, in other words, these forms are the forms that record transactions, record journal entries according to the double entry accounting system, meaning typically they affect at least 2 accounts on the financial statements, balance sheet and income statement, at least, in such a way that the debits equal the credits or the accounting equation remains in balance. The main 2 forms that are tracking something but aren't actually recording a financial transaction are going to be the purchase order that we're working on now, and the other one that comes up a lot is an estimate that we'll see an example for in a future presentation. These are ones that look like they should be recording something when you just look at the forms because numbers will be calculated, but there's not actually anything happening to the financial statements, although they're still going to be tracked internally, in this case in the vendor section, in the case of an estimate in the sales area.